Hey there folks, the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Geordie Greep record, The New Sound. Alright, it's not that new. In fact, it's a mildly old sound. This album came out like several months ago. I'm not even in the same year currently that this album came out in. It's 2025 as I'm filming and uploading this. However, I kind of sort of maybe took a tiny little break, and now I have to catch up with certain records, which is fine, but in certain cases, some albums end up being some of my favorite albums of the year, like this one. So I definitely can't cover this in a short. I refuse to have 50 seconds of me talking about this on my channel and then have it end up in my decade-ending list of the best albums of the 2020s. I have to do a full video on this legally, or else I will die. Probably. If you don't know who Geordie Greep is by now, then are you even a real virgin? I don't think so. But in case for some reason you are up to snuff but are still watching this video, Geordie Greep, former member and arguably most popular member of the avant-garde progressive rock band Black Midi, one of the most critically acclaimed rock bands of the entirety of the past 10 years or so, and a band that released some of the most boundary-pushing and groundbreaking music within their particular niche corner of music. Even if it wasn't always for me, it was always undeniable that they were a technically proficient and creatively profound band, even in their weakest moments. But when they suddenly started to just vanish and then eventually have a very suddenly confirmed wrap-up not that long ago, Black Midi kind of seemed like just a moment of the past. A great band that just ended very prematurely, very suddenly, and that there wasn't going to be much to occur thereafter. However, Geordie Greep has now gone solo with his first full-length solo studio album, The New Sound, proving that he is not only capable of acting just as effectively as an artist in a solo role as he was as a member of Black Midi, but that he arguably is even more creatively boundary-pushing and singular in terms of creative style. I mean, man, this album is just, it's pretty mind-blowing in some places. I'm not even going to try and put this in an eloquent way. It's genuinely one of the best albums of the year. Geordie is the perfect kind of frontman for this very avant-garde style of progressive rock, I guess, music, if you could even call it that, with the hodgepodge of genres featured on here, but I digress. His previous band proved that he was the perfect kind of figure and personality for a record like this, and now that the new sound is actually out, it comes as no surprise that he is absolutely phenomenal here. His sense of humor in particular really shines here on places like Walk Up, for example, the ending having this sort of bizarre sing-songy outro, but more than that, I think he's extremely charismatic as a presence, as well as a pretty clever lyricist overall, with the biggest lyrical highlights coming in the moments where he sort of leans into character studies that he distributes throughout various songs throughout this record, as he develops different narrators that feel fully fleshed out and like actual human beings, rather than just figures used for a track or two. I think most notably the single Holy Holy, the best song here by a mile, which is saying a lot because there is not a song less than fantastic on this record, is an interesting narration from a character who practically exemplifies toxic masculinity and womanizing men that still can't get a date in a way that feels both menacing and pathetic in equal measure, yet he's developed as a narrator and a character so much that in a sense you almost kind of feel pity for him at the same time. Not that you necessarily like him, but you can't help but realize that this is a dynamic individual with a personality, and that you feel just as disgusted as you are intrigued by them. And in that sense, Greep manages to bring to the table really phenomenal storytelling abilities that honestly most of his peers just don't quite have, at least not to the extent that he does. And I'm not surprised that The New Sound is a great record or anything like that. Greep has always been a talented individual no matter what music he's been involved with. He's a phenomenally talented frontman above all else, but it is kind of nice to see that this record still manages to exceed expectations. I mean, I expected a record like this, a solo effort from the man who's been behind some genuinely great music, who has always had a larger-than-life personality behind the mic, to come across the same on a solo effort, if not slightly more so, but honestly, The New Sound is genuinely one of the most impressive vocal performances I've heard all year, from a personality standpoint, from a charismatic standpoint, from the standpoint of overall presence behind the mic, if not technicality, which isn't necessarily the point of a record like this, of course, but yeah, as a whole, the new sound, it manages to just exceed all expectations Greep has set for himself in the past to make this arguably his best record to date in terms of just he and himself alone as a figure. Not to mention everything else that I love about this record that makes it my favorite album he's ever been involved with. The musicianship that's on display here is nothing short of absolutely immaculate, and I would argue that it eclipses most of Greep's previous work that he's been involved with. I mean, one of my biggest qualms with Black Midi as a band was that they frequently came across as being technical for the sake of being technical, or the being avant-garde for the sake of being avant-garde, and while I can admire those qualities of any artist that can demonstrate them fluently, it doesn't always make for the most exciting listening experience in my eyes. I mean, there's a reason that some of my favorite albums of the year so far have been from bands like Lip Critic or Melt Banana, and not from bands like, say, The Smile or Mild Life, because, in my personal opinion, technical prowess only takes one so far when it doesn't feel structurally warranted. I mean, it's incredibly impressive, of course, and I can always admire that, but it doesn't necessarily leave me super blown away emotionally, or wanting to return to something, or anything like that. But the new sound, on the other hand, is a record that, in all of its prog-oriented glory, feels very warranted structurally, and in a sense, I would argue that is largely because of the fact that it draws so many various different influences into it to create something that feels wholly unique and difficult to really compare to any other band or record throughout both modern and classic progressive music. I would argue that the biggest influences found here that we've never seen from Greep before are these somewhat Latin, or at the very least Latin-adjacent influences that you get on display throughout multiple songs here that are a wonderful creative step forward from him. As I've stated, we've never really seen him work with that kind of sound before at all in any of his prior projects, and it's something that you can hear just as frequently in his guitar work as you can in the work from drummers like Chiaguinho Silva on Through the War, or even ex-Black Midi drummer Morgan Simpson on a couple of tracks here or there. And the highly volatile nature of the experimentation that's on display here, bouncing between these Latin influences and these more heavy, kind of almost verging towards prog metal kind of moments, to the more lighthearted and jokey, comedic type Zappa sort of sounds here or there. This volatile nature of all of this experimentation, it adds to the chaotic style of the new sound at large, with the best example arguably being The Magician, which finds itself going through various subtleties and explosions of personality before ending things off finally in what is arguably the true sonic climax of the entire record. But what more important to talk about, what feels more important to talk about at least, is how off-kilter and at times outright demented and deranged a lot of the personality of this record actually is, and how it is in turn aided by the highly technical yet thankfully never restrained instrumentation that's on display here, making for one of the easily most fascinating records of 2024. Even if this isn't your bag, it's interesting no matter what. Going back to the general idea of comparing the new sound to any other prog bands throughout history, I would say maybe this could be seen as a lighter and more at times cartoonish take on a band like Vandergraaf Generator, or even maybe Discipline era King Crimson minus the occasional synth usage. I don't really think that the new sound really sounds like anything in particular, and I have to say, as a whole, it's nice to hear a record like this really represent prog in a way that feels very positive, yet at the same time very raw. It's a record that doesn't necessarily embrace technicality just for the sake of showing off technical ability, but it's also not the kind of record that totally does away with the idea of having musical proficiency in any regard. I mean, when I listen to this record, I get reminded of why I love some of those bands I just mentioned, or for some newer prog bands like Big Big Train or even Unix, because they are bands that take the idea of highly technical ability and provide a more raw background to it, as well as why I'm not a big fan of certain bands like Spock's Beard or Dream Theater, bands that kind of take prog ideas and put them in a light that I would say doesn't necessarily show off the true ability of the band itself, just the technical ability, not the emotional ability or even the thematic ability, not so much in the case of Dream Theater, but you get my point. The new sound is just a beautiful modern representation of what highly progressive avant-garde music can sound like in the context of a man that has a bizarre creative outlook and an even stranger method of executing it. And in turn, I think that this is honestly one of the most creatively impressive and unique albums of the year. And even if you aren't a huge fan of Greep's vocals, his lyrical style, certain things that I have seen criticized since this album's initial release, I think it's pretty undeniable that he is, at the very least, a hugely unique figure that is instantly recognizable, and he would maybe be incredibly lucky to follow up this record with a solo album that is just as extremely interesting, as extremely engrossing, and hopefully he does manage to follow this up with an album that is on the same level roundabout, because The New Sound is easily one of the best albums of 2024. Now, should it have taken me almost exactly 3 months to get to this album? No, absolutely not. Should it have been 2025 by the time I covered an album that was in 2024 that wasn't released at the tail end of December? No, absolutely not. But am I still reviewing this album? Yeah, because it's going to be in like my top 5 for the year-end list, which will, I don't know, I'll be in a few days, I guess. So just look out for that. Leave me alone. This is my last album review of 2024, okay? I'm busy, and by busy, I mean lazy. And I just got around to this finally. I'm going to give this record 4.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. Thank you for watching the Infinite Jukebox, and I'll see you in the next one.